Okay, hello and welcome to another edition of the RevOps Lab podcast. Our guest today is Jacco van der Kooij, best-selling author, renowned keynote speaker, founder of Winning by Design, and an experienced operator with a wealth of hands-on experience as well. So yeah, very glad to have you, Jacco. Warm welcome.
Th- Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure and a treat.
Great, yeah, and you can see Yanis and I, we're standing together in a hotel room. We're actually at the RevOps AF 2024 conference in San Diego. So it's a bit of like a makeshift setup here today. We hope it works out, and apologies for any like audio or video issues that you might experience with this episode.
You folks
Good.
sponsored that. You sponsored that event, didn't you?
Yep, yep. It's we don't sponsor many events, but this is supposed to be a really good one for the RevOps community from RevOps Co-op, one of the largest communities out there. And yeah, let's see how it's gonna be. We're excited.
Ah, fantastic. Well, thank you for contributing to the well-being of our community of RevOps people. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're just really big fans of real operators, who do hands-on work and really go into the details. So that's why we love this community a lot. And I think actually you also did a great contribution just recently, right? So you published your latest book, Revenue Architecture, which we both read and absolutely loved. So what we wanted to kind of like get started with in this episode today is just to, hear what inspired you to write this book on revenue architecture.
Well, yeah, I think for me the number one thing here is as an engineer, I'm able to produce things over the years. And one of the things that I used to produce down here is one of the PCBs. This is what I generated or created a few years ago, a 7-layer PCB. This is an MPEG-2 descrambler demultiplexer that I once created for the launch of MPEG-2 as a standard in the world. What we noticed, what I find is that many trades we can apply scientific principles, but when it comes down to GTM, it feels like it's just a free-for-all. Anybody with a voice, young, old, inexperienced, experienced, if you can deliver a pitch well, then you can create a business for yourself in GTM, regardless whether you know what you're doing or not. And that I wanted to overcome that with a more scientific approach.
Yeah, sounds good. It makes less sense. In the first chapter of the book, you also talk about like how the markets are changing. Maybe you can give a bit of like an overview of what you've observed in the last couple of months. I think particularly, right, like since COVID ended, and a lot of other big world events happened.
Yeah, what obviously what we have seen is that like for the past decade, and I would say since late 2011, when Mark Andreessen came out with the article "Why Software is Eating the World," the launch of many SaaS companies became into being. Today, we are looking at over 35,000 SaaS companies, and through that decade, the way they grew, they exploded was primarily through an approach, a GTM approach, a go-to-market approach referred to as the grow at all costs. Now, when we see today, what you see here behind me from the book is that we see that growth actually has started to slow down. And over the past 12 quarters, this is from the public 87 public SaaS companies provided by David Spitz from Benchsites. What we see here is that growth has slowed down to about half. Now, if we take a look, that's not the only slowing down. Also, if you take a look at the cost increase, you'll see that again down here. We see that the cost per dollar acquired. So if you put the cost of marketing and sales against the amount of revenue acquired, you'll see that dollar of revenue acquired, which was late 2021, about $1.50, has now broached $2.50 and is hovering around $2.60 for every dollar acquired. Yeah, that means that growth at all costs, simply said, half the growth and double the cost, right? And that's no longer working. And obviously, that's the reason why so many are scrabbling to figure out how to solve for this.
Yeah, I think it's one of the big challenges in software right now, and it's actually not easy to overcome. In your book, you speak a lot about go-to-market motions and the revenue factory. What is a go-to-market motion for you? Yeah.
Well, first, what I want to bring up is like we believe that when a company surpasses $10 million, it functions and operates like a factory, just like any other thing. Any other thing that you produce in volume, it creates a factory element. And so what you'll see down here is that we too believe that that your business, your SaaS business, works like a factory. And like I depicted down here, if we look at the growth of a factory, or if you look at the goals of a factory, they're primarily looking at growth, sustainable growth, because it needs to be, like more and more, efficient. But one of the things that is odd that we find constantly is like, hey, you know what? It's not just about growth. I also need to make sure, like that I make money. And then when I start lowering the cost of the production and starting to increase the revenue, sooner or later the quality comes down. And that brings in the third goal. I got to produce quality. And that's what is depicted down here. Revenue factories produce growth cost efficiently or sustainably and must deliver quality, which is in a durability way. Now, that third part will come to a later part. First things first, we need to create sustainable growth. It goes beyond that. We can also think that if you think of a revenue factory, that every one of your GTM motions operates like a production line. And that production line could be your PLG production line, could be your SDR/AE production line, could be a deep enterprise sales production line. GTM motions, like a PLG motion or like a high touch motion, can create production lines of revenue. And when you add up the revenue of all those different GTM motions, you get your revenue growth. As simple as that. Once we start looking at business this way, gentlemen, it becomes a lot easier for us to tackle what the challenges are today and how to solve for them.
Yeah, when I read your book, I was absolutely amazed, because if you don't think about it in that way, how you describe it, it is actually quite difficult to depict the different motions, right? And I think that's maybe the starting point. So what's your experience? How do you diagnose the go-to-market motions you actually already have? And then, how do you go further in measuring the profitability? Do you do that by go-to-market motion? But I'm super curious about that.
Yeah. So first things first, there are 5 GTM motions that we know of today. Now, we can, often when we think about GTM motions, we think about terms such as a PLG motion or an enterprise motion. So what I bring up here is 5 GTM motions, okay? And you'll see down here, vertical axis, that is the number of customers served per year. Horizontal axis is the annual contract value. At the top, you see 5 different GTM motions: the no touch, the low touch, the medium touch, the high touch, and the dedicated touch. And what we notice over the years is that these 5 different GTM motions serve different markets. So pick a number. Let's say you sell a product. Pick any number. What is your average contract value of a product that you're normally selling?
100K.
100K?
100K.
Now, 100K in this case puts you right down here, right? And that says that you most likely are field sales dependent, targeted, and your sales organization is a field sales organization. Your marketing campaign is targeting, probably a form of an account-based marketing, and your customer success organization is organized by segment. In other words, by pharma or by construction, and so on and so forth. Then what you can also see is that you're probably still a little bit dependent on inbound, and it starts to wane off down here. So your inbound goes up to a certain point, but then it becomes more and more networking. And so those are the GTM motions that you see down here. Now, what we have learned from that is that the discrepancy between these GTM motions at the top, every time you move from one motion to another, the cost goes up by anywhere from 2x to 5x, and in some cases even to 10x. So if I move from a no-touch to a low-touch GTM motion, the cost double. If I go from a low-touch to a medium-touch and I start to deploy an SDR and AE, they may again double or even quadruple. If I go from a medium-touch to a high-touch, an enterprise sales, where I deploy a sales engineer now comes into play, and I do I have to do a proof of concept, I have to run an ROI model, then suddenly a high-touch becomes into place. And if I use this dedicated strategic account manager to that, then again, the cost goes up 2 to 5x. And the last one can be very, very big, right? If I run a $100 million account, I may have a team of 20 people working for me. So what you'll see down here is this creates 5 different production lines. And these production lines, we can do different things with over time.
Do you think that there's also sort of like a stuck in the middle issue here? So like the medium touch is really like probably not like really good, but then it's better to either like have like a clear decision. Okay, I really want to go low touch, I want to go high touch, and I want to go there as quickly as possible. Or do you think companies need to go through the different motions step by step to
Yeah,
really scale their business?
yeah, what we see today is that there's just a lot of randomness going around. Like a lot of people doing
Hmm.
different things at the same, like without knowing it. They're just going to a conference and they hear something new. You know what? We need to do it that way or we need to do it this way. They constantly are changing their opinion and coming to a different kind of conclusion. So one of the examples that you sometimes see is that we run into this. The company sells a $120,000 ACV product, uses an ABM campaign for field sales organizations, but also deploys an SDR AE organization somewhere along the line, uses outbound, like more spam-like volume-based outreach. On top of that, has a help desk and has an inside, like sales organization. Like they
Yeah.
operate at like $18
They
million,
got it all.
right? And it's like and what you'll see down here is why? Because hey, we rotated through 3 VPs of sales, we rotated to 2 VPs or CMOs, right? Like, and so it becomes this kitchen drawer. So you no longer are running a well-organized, structured factory. You're running like an artistry firm. If messy, right? You walk on the production floor and you see everything is a mess. Everybody, this is very common, and that is what we're trying to say. Is like, now your question was, which one should we pick, right? Why is all the different? Folks, mathematics tells us what we should pick, right? Like we can say scale it. If it's scalable, is it also sustainable? Scalable means if I change the number of inputs, will my outputs change accordingly? And sustainable means, can I afford it? If I buy a lead at $100,000 and the product sells at the $10,000, then I'm not affordable, right? So you can, we can calculate whether it makes sense or not to run that specific GTM motion.
We just lost you the last seconds. We're going to cut this. So the way I would, the way I understand you is most companies actually don't really have this concept in mind of a revenue factory and different go-to-market motions and being really clear on where to invest and where not to invest and what not to do, right? We are basically in a world where growth has actually become more expensive and is stalling. So I would expect a lot of folks now to react like, okay, we have to do more, we have to do better, faster, and what I mean is, what's your approach to like that, right? Like what do you tell the folks? How do they diagnose what should be working, and then how do they go about it? Yeah.
Okay, we have a few ground rules that may help. First thing is, up to about $10 million, focus growth on one GTM motion only. Do not try to run multiple GTM motions. When you run multiple GTM motions, like at the pick down here, like in this particular down here, you're going to see, there we go. And this is all from the book, right? I'm all showing you pictures from the book. What you see down here is this company runs 3 GTM motions. It sells a product at 80,000, 150,000, and 500,000. Now, those are all high ACVs. You can also have a product that sells at $100, at $10,000, and $30,000. But in this case, they use 3 GTM motions. That means that your website must have adhere to 3 different ICPs. Your salespeople must sell to 3 different customers. You get 3 different product lines. You get 3 different, like customer success approaches. All that makes the company spin very thinly across these. And so that is ill-advised early on because you want to create momentum. Now, if you think about HubSpot, what is the main HubSpot approach to go-to-marketing? If you think about HubSpot lines up with which go-to-market motion, what do you know HubSpot for?
I would say inbound for sure.
Inbound and HubSpot. What you'll see is they're a match. The go-to-market motion that they have and the product they sell are a match. If I tell you Slack, what PLG motion do you think of? Sorry, what GTM motion do you think of?
And
yeah. You already gave the answer. Yeah, you already gave the answer.
But I think PLG at its best, right? Virality and then self-checkout, low touch, no touch actually.
Okay, now what you'll see is, okay, so HubSpot and inbound are really matching up, like a product and a GTM motion matches up. If you think of Slack and PLG, they really match up. I can even tell you that many cases here in the US, people are buying their Tesla online. You buy a self-driving car with a self-service portal. Even in a weird way, that's a match. If you go up to $10 million in revenue, you need to make sure that your one GTM motion that you pick is a match with your product that you sell. You need to push the pedal on that, really identify that. And so as you throw through that, then you scale to $10 million. Up to $50 million, we then go deploy 3 GTM motions maximum. And so now we are deploying a second and a third. And you may start testing already at 5, 6, 7 million. You may start testing what your second GTM motion is. But to get to 20 million, you got to get you launch your second GTM motion. And to get to 50 million, you got to launch your 3 GTM motions. Once you start to surpass $50 million, you need to be working on another product. Your product needs to scale. That is a basic ground rule of generating revenue. 1 GTM motion up to 10, 3 GTM motions up to 50, and following that, you need to launch a secondary product like marketing and sales, or sales and customer success, for example.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think like I always have this the simple calculation top of mind when thinking about the complexity of GTM models or just revenue models in general. It's like you have let's say you have one product, one country, one go-to-market motion, right? Like that's relatively simple complexity. But then as soon as you add like I know like a second geo, like a second product, a second motion, and so on, the complexity increases like massively, right? You like basically and suddenly you have like I don't know like one motion, one country, one product. Complexity is 3. If you just like multiply it, then you add like a second geo, then suddenly you're at 6. Then you add like a second product, and so on. Like it like it grows quickly, right? Like, and so that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
Okay, so down here you'll see, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Down here, what I'm depicting is I'm depicting a GTM motion that is based on, this is a single GTM motion. And what you'll see down here, I via an ABM campaign, I am targeting an organization. I then use an ICP description, which leverages messaging, correction, and a buying center. I'm using a medic-based sales methodology in order to create a commitment. If I don't get it, I start nurturing, right? So you see down here, this is a relatively straightforward kind of approach, right? Like this would be a high-touch GTM motion, right? Now look what happens when I start adding, and I need to zoom out a little bit. Look what happens when I start adding another GTM motion to that. Now, before I do that, every time I use the 4 key blocks down here, ICP, medic as a methodology, a nurturing campaign in the background, and an ABM outbound marketing technique, right? So these are my 4 building blocks that I'm building my high touch organization around. Now watch what happens when I start increasing that and I add another GTM motion. How many interconnections I have to have, right? So now in this case, I added a low touch GTM motion. So you suddenly see content becomes super important. I need to have SEO because I'm inbound. I may have a freemium model. I have my inbound motion needed. I have band instead of medic. And all these things start to interconnect with each other. That's your second GTM motion if you're not careful. That is the problem that people feel every day when they launch multiple GTM motions, right? Every time you launch a GTM motions, more and more things need to get connected. Your website needs to do more and more thing and answer to more and more masters.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, complexity increases drastically. Want to switch gears a little bit and talk about like one of the models that you discuss in your book. I think overall it's 6 essential models that you discuss, like different models that basically help operators govern their recurring revenue business. So you have the revenue model, you have the data model, mathematical model, operating model, growth model, and GTM model. And probably we don't have time to focus on all of them. And since we're a RevOps podcast, we thought it makes sense to focus on one of the favorite topics of RevOps people, and that is data. So the data model. And maybe you could give like a brief overview, for those who already work with a lot of data, day-to-day sort of like how you think about the data model in the revenue architecture and the revenue factory.
Yeah. What you see down here, as you correctly depicted, there are 6 models. Now, I want you to think of the following. If you think about building, if you think about, hey, you need to explain to me, explain to me how human motion works. What are the elements of a human body that I need in order to make a human body walk? What are the structures that you think of?
Well, muscles, neurons,
Muscles,
bones.
bones.
Yeah.
Okay, muscles and bones. Now,
Yeah.
if I look at the bone structure, right, and I just lay the bones out, nothing, just pure skeleton, right? You look at that, will that body walk just based on the bones?
Let's try.
No.
Probably not.
Probably not. But I can give you 100% accurate picture of the bones. This is 100% accurate. You look at the bones and you go like this. For 99.99%, this is 100 of all human beings. This is 100% accurate, right? But I need the muscular, so I need a different model. Now, I can give you only the muscular model without the bones, and you would not know how it works either. So these 2 models combined, each being 100% correct, when you overlay them on top of each other, you start to get the idea. Now, if I add the cardiovascular system, if I add the nervous system, and so on and so forth, layer after layer that I'm building a human body, one of the most complex systems, right? I can do the same with a bridge. When I'm building a bridge, I go like, okay, what is the infrastructure? Now, in the world, there are about like arguably between 6 and 10 different bridges. And each of these bridges has approximately the same model, right? And if I take a suspension bridge, I mean, it has pillars, it has a suspension cable, it has the deck hanging from the suspension cable. These are basic elements. And all of these elements I can model. So if I want a suspension bridge and I need to make a bigger span, I can either make the tower higher or the span wider, right? These are just mathematical calculations. Models, the more models I'm using, the more accurate my picture becomes. And so I can do more of that, right? And so what I see is I can use in our world, I can also use models. And, I can also start using techniques. Now, the models that we use are the 6 models that you talk about, the 6 essential models. Now, of the 6 essential models, the model that you're referring about is the data model. Now, the data model sits on top of the infrastructure of the revenue model. And the data model plays up to the mathematical model. The same way how a bone structure and a muscular structure are combined need to work. A data structure by itself and the data model won't work. Now, the model that we use is an extension of an old version of it. Previously, we had like different kind of versions, but today we have in generally the bow tie, the extension of the marketing and sales funnel to cover for the entire thing. Now, many listeners of you are already familiar with the bow tie. You have seen it plenty enough. The bow tie provides us the structure and tells us what we need to do. Right? It tells us where we are coming from. It tells us, where the recurring revenue takes place. And then from the bow tie, I can now start extending the data structure. I separate model and structure into 2 different things. Model, funnel to bow tie, structure. I'm now starting to name them volume metrics, conversion metrics. Now, the problem that you as a RevOps expert has to realize is that every GTM motion uses unique nomenclature. If I go an inbound lead motion, I'm talking about MQL and SQLs. If I go outbound, I may also talk about MQLs and SQLs. But if I go account-based, I'm talking about marketing qualified accounts. I'm talking about opportunities, qualified opportunities. And if I go into a PLG style, no-touch motion, I'm talking about product qualified leads, PQLs, and so on and so forth. Each of these has different motions. So the data structure needs to be robust enough that when you overlay multiple GTM motions on top of it, that you can compare them against each other. That, what I'm talking to you about, folks, is proper engineering that is long overdue and that we need to do these days in our world.
Yeah. I think that's great. One of the just like finding like this underlying sort of like base data model that you can use for all the different GTM motions that you have in place, so you can actually make them comparable and so on. I think one thing that I find always quite intriguing around data and numbers is that actually a lot of people are afraid of them. Like normal operators are afraid of them, sales leaders are afraid of them. So I'm wondering, how can people sort of like lose their fear of it? How can companies find a common language that really helps, everyone in the organization to understand why data matters and what these numbers mean? Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so numbers is simply forms of metrics. Now what you see down here at the bottom, many of you will see the bow tie, right? Like for those of you online or just listening to this, at the bottom layer, there's a bow tie. And the bow tie is the model. It tells me what am I measuring where? What is a prospect? What is a lead? What is an opportunity, qualified opportunity, and so on. In the middle of that bow tie, I convert that. Now, understand that while I'm on the left of that bow tie, the acquisition part, I think in numbers. I think in like number of leads, number of opportunities, number of qualified opportunities, number of wins. And on the left, it decays. I start with 1,000, I end with 1 win. It decays. On the right, I grow. I start to grow with a customer that spends $1,000 and ends up spending like $6,000 over its lifetime, or spend with a customer that pays $100,000 a year, but after 3 years pays $160,000. I increase. So on the left is decay, on the right is accumulation. Now, on top of that are layers. And the layer is kind of like the same thing that you have in Google Maps. You can open up layers and you can see more and more information. You got to think of that as layered information. Now, in this case, the lower layered information is the more detailed. The higher layered information is the more like, hey, snappy kind of data metrics that you need. So I start at the lower level. At the lower level, I have time metrics measured in seconds in case of PLG, in days in case of medium touch, and it may be months, sometimes quarters in case of large scale sales that like deep, high touch and dedicated touch. I have volume metrics. Think of volume metrics such as like number of leads and so on and so forth. I have campaign costs. How much does a campaign cost? Either a customer campaign or a lead campaign. How much do the people cost? What's the salary? Like all these are highly detailed information. Now, most of us operators, work a little bit at that level, right? We work at that lower level. I can go up one level higher. I get unit economics. What is the average revenue per sales rep? What is the cost that we spent on a deal, and so on and so forth? I can create a growth formula. It takes us 1,000 leads to create 1 win. I can create productivity metrics. There's 200K per rep per month generated. It's a higher level of the lower level. The tactical or bow tie metrics can be translated into more operator metrics. What do I need to push in order to get? If I double the leads, what do I get? If I hire twice as many salespeople, what do I get? On top of that is another layer. And this is more what we refer to as the strategic or financial metrics layer. You now see NRR and ARR, which is a combination of the metrics that lay behind the layer lower. I get LTV, which is the average contract value over the number of years, right? I get client acquisition costs. What is the cost that I spent in order to revenue that I acquired? I get free cash flow margin. That is all at the financial metrics. And then all the way at the top, I'm going to get the executive or investor metrics. What's the growth rate? What's the CAC payback period? What's the LTV to CAC ratio? What's the rule of 40? And above are actually just shorthands used by investors in order to make a judgment. Now, if I ask you which, if I go from the bottom layer to the next layer to the layer above, every time I go up, I am further removed from the actual metrics, which often means that time-wise, I have a bigger time window. All the way at the top, I am often 3 to 6 months behind what happens all the way at the bottom. It just takes time to propagate. That means that if I run a business with my eyes on the top layer, like so many companies are, I am not running the business. It's like, I'm steering the boat and then I have to wait 6 months for the boat to actually make a turn. You can't steer the boat that way, right? That explains people that are new to metrics on how to use metrics properly.
It reminds me so much of the annual planning cycles and the top-down and bottom-up process, and how much that is broken when you talk about it, where it always feels it's misaligned, right? And it's too late, usually as well.
That's right. And so what you'll see here is a simple way of producing and creating something that we already know for the longest time, right? We already know that like this is how it works. So no surprise to us on how this works, but we are now like, look, this is an engineering perspective, right? Like if I go back on bit level, that's byte level, that's like network level, application layer, like it's the same thing. It's the same thing. But we are afraid of it, and as a result, we often run the business the wrong way. And when I step into we at Winning by Design, we've now helped over 1,000 SaaS companies, right? Big and small. I think we help about like at least 20, if not closer to 25% of all public SaaS companies. These are things that RevOps people inside these companies, or even let me ask you this: where do you think RevOps operate?
I mean, on the lower 3 levels, I would say, right? So this is, I mean, actually, no. Let me change my. So I think actually on all of them, if they're like in a really strategic position, which most of them, unfortunately are not. But then if they're like more on the admin level, then I would say on the lower 2 levels mostly.
Okay. Yeah. Where does financial planning and advising work on? Which one?
Fourth. Yeah.
And so what you'll see is like, we all say everybody, an investor should know all. I mean, if I ask, what should an investor know? An investor says I should know all 4 layers, right? Okay. Because that lower level is 20 pages.
I don't know.
Right? That lower level is 20 pages of detailed metrics, right? And so what you'll see is everybody has a focus area, right? And so the focus area of FP&A is probably on the financial metrics. Of RevOps is probably on operator metrics. Of investment is probably at the investor metrics, right? So everybody has a layer to focus. Everybody wants to know everything. I get that, but nobody can operate on every layer accurately. And so you'll see that each layer has a person that should focus on that, associated to it, that has to make sure at that layer, make sure the data is accurate and correct.
Yeah, which I mean is a huge problem in itself, and something that if you think about what we discussed earlier, you have not one of those models or like layered cakes, but let's say 3 or 5, right? The complexity becomes even higher because you have to make sure that the data model supports, your, let's say, financial and investor metrics for all these different go-to-market motions, right? Which is extremely hard to do in itself if you think about it from an operations standpoint.
Yeah, and this is the reason why I wrote the book Revenue Architecture. This is the reason why I put down and accurately describe and say like, hey, can we just lay down a framework the same way how at one point in time, through what I earlier depicted, this MPEG board, right? Like how we depicted how a video packet is going to be created and how a video packet becomes a pixel on the screen that you can see with your eyes. This is no different. And as, like the famed Steve Jobs says, right, like we don't pick the dots. Well, my dot did not go through calligraphy like his dot went. My dot went through MPEG engineering, and my dot went through network layer, application layer, and whatnot. And I see that with GTM, we have the exact same problem that we had in the 1980s, where GTM motions were different TV standards like PAL and SACOM and NTSC, and nobody could receive TV signals from the other side of the world because it was operating at a different frequency and a different voltage. And through MPEG, we all made it uniform. I believe the same thing is in play right now. We need to make all these GTM motions start talking the same language so we can compare them against each other. And that's the job of revenue architecture. That trait, I believe, is a fundamental trait for RevOps people, but also for FP&A and also for executive. Maybe we're at the lighter version of it. But everybody needs to understand, how does this machine work that generates and turns $1 million companies into $1 billion value companies?
What I find so interesting is that many of those different go-to-market motions didn't exist 20 years ago. And now we have all these different ones. And then I remember, 4 years ago, everybody had to move to PLG, right? So everybody moves to PLG, not understanding that it's also a fundamental change in product. And that usually takes a long time. And it's even not said that it's going to be successful. And so now we're here at a situation where we have all these different go-to-market motions, and everybody took a bit of different ones and combined them into something where all the fundamentals you're just talking about are just really broken, and it's not easy to solve this, I think.
Yeah. Well, obviously with revenue architecture, we're trying to solve that for you. But, I'm going to give you what you just brought up is a fundamental piece to understand why that works and why, what the challenges are. So I'm going to bring that up for you. I'm looking up. Give me a second. Okay. I'm going to bring this up from the book. So here we go again. Okay. So what you see down here are the 5 GTM motions at the top. No touch, low touch, medium touch. And you see what I said before, right? Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to overlay the different engines. So on the low end, the no touch, it's primarily driven by product. The product drives reputation, and the reputation drives users to generate word of mouth. That's the engine where we work at $100 a month, $20 a month, the freemium, whatever it is, right? This is how Slack became popular. This is how that engine works, right? Now, what I'm then going to depict is the next motion. That medium touch pretty much works on content and events and thought leadership. So suddenly you get Pulse, which is the Gainsight conference. You have the content, right? In the old days, Sales Loft was known for or you get a HubSpot with its inbound content marketing. Really important events, the Pulse, the content, and the thought leadership is key down there, right? So we get John Miller, former founder of Marketo, speak up at ABM conferences. That's how you make that middle tiers work. Now, think about it for a second before I move on to the high end. Think about if I'm selling you a $250,000, multi-million-dollar piece of software, what do you think is different in these? Again, think of 3 things, right? Before I bring it up. Here we go. If you think of that high end, right? If you think about, go ahead. What do you think? Well, I already put it up, but tell me, what do you think it is, right?
I can't see, but please go ahead. School feels very far away, and I almost certainly will fail.
On the high end, we look at brand. How important is the brand? It's super important. If I buy $1 million piece of software for you, I may not just trust the salesperson. I may not trust who is on the phone with me. I trust the brand, right? I trust that the brand will, if something happens. I also trust people. I trust the particularly experts on the team. I trust the engineers behind it that have built it, the expertise. And so I look for expertise-based leaderships. Now, what you'll see that if you combine them, that is 3 very different engines. That is 3 different ways on how your business works. So like we said earlier, you can't, at less than $10 million, operate 3 GTM motions that are fundamentally built on 3 different engines. It's like, hey, I got a hybrid engine, I got a gasoline engine, I got an electrical engine, and I got like a third one, a wind energy engine on top of that, right? And I'm trying to run this car. Well, when you run 3 engines like that, you will not have optimal performance on any one of those 3. So that's the reason why I say early on, focus on just one engine, whatever that engine is, focus on that engine and push the 3. Now, as you start to launch 3 engines, you need to be very cautious because these 3 engines interfere with each other. Now, I'll give you a typical example where it almost always goes wrong. A lot of people think that, hey, I have an enterprise motion, I want to launch a PLG motion for some lead gen or some sales pipeline generation. It doesn't work like that. When people on the low end, when you buy a $100 product, you buy the product and you expect the service to be for free. Okay? When I buy a $250,000 product, I actually buy the service and I expect the product to be for free. Because if I'm buying a $250,000 car from you, and you're changing me for the mats on below me, like I would be like seriously upset, right? So I expect this. I pay for the service. 2 completely different domains. And that tells you like this is the
Yeah.
point that I'm trying to depict everywhere, is like we can reason and we can architect all these things. And revenue architecture is a way to scale and grow your company, the same way how you can design a building to be either a one carport garage or a 20-story apartment complex.
Perfect. Jacco, thank you so much. I think this is a perfect moment to end. I will definitely link to your book in our show notes and the description of the podcast recording. I think you brought up so many great metaphors that can really help people to understand really the concept behind the revenue factory, the different models, the operating models, and also use those to build and explain this knowledge within their own organization, which I think is also extremely important to be able to share and spread the good word, so to say. So thank you for doing it.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you all. Thank you all
Awesome.
for having me. Like you have invested in the conference, I've invested in that book to make sure that we share all our knowledge as best as we can. Folks, we are on a marquee point. We are coming out of a decade of growth at all costs. We know that it stopped working, but today nobody has a new approach. I believe we, as the professionals in RevOps, we know what to do. We know what to do. We need to calculate what works. We need to properly scale and build companies. Now, that doesn't start at 1 million. I get that. At 1 million, you still need to figure out your way. But at $10 million in recurring revenue, we need to properly architect revenue growth the same way that any other factory would do that. And for that, I believe that we are all looking at a fantastic future for RevOps, where all of us can live in a more scientific proven world rather than just having to respond to whatever a speaker at some conference says is the right thing to do. With that said, thank you all for having me. Thank you for the crowd, for your audience to listen to us and have this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.